What is going on, everyone? Welcome back to the Actually Good Coffee Podcast, the show where we talk about all things coffee related, all while I drink a cup of coffee. The coffee price is still at an all-time high as I record this episode. It is currently sitting at $305.50. Crippling price right now, but we will find a way. Today I wanted to talk about specifically how that price is actually starting to have an effect on the birthplace of espresso, Italy. Italy is currently dealing with one of the largest and first in a long time price increase on their €1 espresso. It has been a long time tradition in Italy that you go into a coffee shop, you buy a shot of espresso, and you place €1 on the counter to pay for your drink, but it doesn't seem like that's going to be happening for much longer. According to Josh Kirby, one of the writers over at The Telegraph, he goes into detail on this topic and says, espresso is sacred in Italy. When you compare it to the UK, the average cup is around €3.70. Italians enjoy some of the cheapest coffee in Europe at $1.30 a cup. A shot of espresso can be found for even less, with espresso available for just €1 in many Italian coffee bars. But despite an immovable culture in which affordable access to caffeine is enshrined, Italians' cheap pick-me-up is under threat. So how has Italy managed to resist global inflationary pressures and coffee bean shortages to keep its espresso so cheap? And are these days almost over? Basically, the first thing that you're dealing with when you're starting a coffee shop is your startup cost. The main cost is going to be your espresso equipment after the furniture that you actually need to purchase for your shop. And in a place like the UK, those coffee shop owners purchase all of the equipment themselves. Obviously, that comes at a higher cost, but they have more ownership over their equipment, their furniture, and just more freedom to charge the price that they want with their product. In Italy, roasting companies will offer to cover startup costs for bars. They will pay for espresso machines, cups, napkins, you name it, he says. In exchange, the bars sign a contract promising to buy a certain amount of beans every week at a set price. But there is a hidden cost. The roasting companies often charge above a fair rate and get bars to commit to buying far more coffee than they really need. There have been a couple businesses in Italy that have broken away from this model of ownership, but it is exceedingly rare. So the first thing you might be thinking of is, how is the coffee so cheap in Italy? So in the early 1900s, Italians were roasting Robusta. The thing with Robusta, it has a much higher caffeine content, but it doesn't have as pleasant of a flavor as Arabica coffee. So there's two main varietals of coffee. There's Arabica and Robusta. Italians traditionally use Robusta to roast their coffee, and the taste isn't as good, but it does have a higher caffeine content. In order to make up for that flavor, that lack of flavor, maybe that's a better way to put it, you find a lot more of those roast flavor notes in that type of roasted coffee, because instead of relying on the actual bean itself, you're relying on the machine to provide those roasty notes that pretty much go hand in hand with traditional Italian coffee. That doesn't mean it's necessarily bad, it's just that type of coffee. And because the quality is not as high, Robusta coffee is quite a bit cheaper than Arabica coffee, but that has changed a lot recently. Robusta is pretty much neck and neck with Arabica coffee prices, and as we've seen, Arabica coffee has dramatically increased in price over these past few weeks especially, but really over these past 6 months or so. Robusta has seen an even higher percentage increase because it was at a point lower than Arabica coffee, and like I said, it's about neck and neck now. Marco Capillari runs a specialist coffee bar in Melaleuca in Florence. He says, here there is a stand-up, walk-in, walk-out culture, which means bars tend to sell more coffee than British or American counterparts. Bars often don't even have any seats, and most people don't have milk in their drink, so it's a 45-second transaction. By the time a hipster in London has made a perfect flat white, a barista in Milan has made and served 4 or 5 espressi for a similar total price. So Italy operates on this volume-based model, similar to how Brazil operates on a volume-based model for the coffee that they produce. Lower quality coffee, but they rely on the volume itself to cover all of their expenses. Italy leads Europe in tax evasion. That's a big one. Holy shit. According to the European Commission, with the total estimated 14 billion euro evaded in 2021, 24% of the European Union total. Its coffee industry is no exception, but Capillari argues this can be essential to the survival of some espresso bars. If every bar in town is pricing their espresso at 120, a bar may have no choice but to get caught up in doing the same thing to compete. Espresso bars are also often owned by couples or families, Capillari adds, which means that spending money on decent wages is not as much of a concern as it is for coffee shops in the UK, which must usually employ external staff. So essentially what he's talking about here is that in order to get by with this business model, it's not sustainable. You're cutting costs in other ways. You're running a cash business, so it's much easier to evade taxes this way. So this basically further emphasizes the point that this model just isn't going to work, and there's going to have to be a change or Italy's coffee market is going to disappear. Coffee is not thought of as a product in Italy, but as a human right. People think society owes them coffee, says Pettinari, so it has to be cheap because everybody should be able to afford it. But if you keep the price of espresso at €1, it's unsustainable for everybody in the supply chain, farmers, baristas, cafe owners. Suddenly there's no margin of profit. The people dictate what the price is going to be. Both Capillari and Pettinari now run specialty coffee shops, which means their customers expect a higher degree of quality and therefore accept a premium price point. But making this transition was not easy. We raised our prices, and now our espresso costs more than the average in town by around 50 cents. We lost a bunch of customers. Lots of our old regulars left because they could not understand, even though we tried to make them understand. So in Italy, coffee is like an essential human right. They're expecting coffee to be set at this price. Italy also has a much older population on average, so that idea is even more so reinforced. Coffee bean prices have surged 48% over the past year and almost trebled since their lows in 2018. This past year, Brazil especially has been dealing with a rough rainfall conditions. It seemed to be a little too late once they finally did come, and that's definitely going to affect the harvest year of 2025-26. That's part of the reason why this coffee price is so much higher than usual. Pettinari adds, coffee is a very delicate plant and requires certain conditions to produce good fruit. You need a certain altitude over 1,600 meters above sea level, and you need a tropical climate. That's actually not true. A lot of great coffee is grown below 1,600 meters, but when you're growing coffee above that height, usually you are going to find a little bit more nuanced flavors, like more delicate, flowery notes, more, sweet, acidic notes that you wouldn't find under that height. But I wouldn't say that specialty coffee requires to be above that elevation. That's just that's not true. Farmers are being forced to climb further up the mountains year after year, and because mountains are pyramids, the higher you go, the less farming space you have. Again, not necessarily true. Attacks on cargo ships in the Red Sea from Houthi rebels earlier this year also hit the supply of coffee beans, contributing to a spike in prices. That is true. That has been happening. I don't believe it's going on as much as it was, if it still is. Italy may be forced to finally accept the third wave of coffee. Before the third wave coffee, there was not much coffee culture in the UK. It was something new, so it took off, explains Pettinari. When it came to Italy, there was such a strong previous coffee culture that we first needed to break down that wall before we could make something new. But the big coffee companies do not want this to happen because they will lose profits. Currently, they can buy a bag of green coffee for $1 a kilo and sell it for $25 to the coffee shops. I don't know, dude, where are they getting this coffee from? Tastes change, including those of Italians, but suddenly going from a full-bodied coffee that tends to be balanced with hints of dried fruit and toast to a less full-bodied one with floral aromas that are sometimes fruity and with an acidic taste is not an easy step. Super cheap espresso prices should not be sustained. You're lowering the quality of coffee over time by keeping it at a certain price point. It hasn't really changed in 25 years, while everything else has gone up 4 or 5 times. Just to kind of recap this and go over this a little bit, the type of contracts that they're talking about in Espresso, I have heard of. I've talked to people within the coffee industry and dealing with certain clients on my own. We've actually had a couple clients that we were going to go into business based off of that type of model where we would buy their machines for them, and then in return they would have to buy a certain amount of volume from us. I don't really advise for that model because like we're seeing in Italy, it's not really sustainable. model, and you're actually shooting your customer in the foot in doing so, because now they're essentially required to buy coffee from you in order to pay back the amount that you have loaned them through coffee equipment, which in a lot of cases can be over 20 grand, which can take years depending on how much volume that they're going to be buying from you. But I wouldn't advise this for anyone that is going into coffee roasting, especially if you're just getting started. Maybe if you're a much larger business, you can really start to look into this, but it's a difficult step to take unless you have a lot of infrastructure on your side. You need to have techs, you need to have the experience in doing this, you need to have the assurance that your green coffee is going to remain at a certain amount of price, which you can mitigate through contracts with your importers, or you have your own importing aspect of your business on your own. But that's a tough model to sustain. And again, like we're seeing in Italy, it doesn't work for that long. Something has to change at that point. And the best way of sort of resolving this issue is finding the clients that are going to invest the money into their equipment, into the training that they offer their employees so that they know how to take care of their equipment, they know how to serve coffee properly, and they just appreciate the product more. And that's ultimately what you're trying to do. You're trying to find people that appreciate the product as much as you do so that you can best convey that to your customers, so they know that when they're going to that coffee shop, they're going to get quality every time. They know that the coffee shop is buying beans from a quality roaster. They know that the people that are working there are trained on how to provide the quality cup to that customer. They know everybody's working hard behind the scenes in order to get them a good product when it's finally served to them at the table. That's it for right now. I appreciate everyone listening, and I will talk to you all again very soon.